Lawyer looks at it and says, Jack Smith. Lawyer looks at it and says, NDO signed by Judge Boasberg. Lawyer looks at the names, as a reasonably competent lawyer would. Says, they're members of Congress. If that was you, what would you do?
Welcome back to Freedom Forge, where we cut through the mainstream narrative and stand up for truth, liberty, and the American Constitution. Before we jump into today's topic, do us a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Your engagement helps us keep the voice of freedom alive. Now, let's dive right in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chamberlain, I believe 4 telephone companies received these subpoenas for the phone records, the metadata of 20 members of Congress. Is that your understanding?
That sounds right to me, yes.
Okay. I don't have time to talk about all of them. Let me just pick one. Verizon. About 90,000 employees, I think. $140 billion worth of revenue. Does Verizon hire dummies to work in its legal department?
I should think not. They've probably got a good reservoir of lawyers to pick from.
Okay. I suppose you were one of the lawyers at Verizon, and you don't strike me as a dummy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And you got a subpoena from Jack Smith with an NDO, non-disclosure order, signed by Judge Boasberg. Do you think a reasonably competent lawyer at Verizon would know who Jack Smith was?
Yes, I think so.
Do you think a reasonably competent lawyer at Verizon would know who Judge Boasberg was or would inquire about him?
Yeah, I think you could pretty quickly Google him, and if you were concerned that maybe he wasn't actually a federal district judge, I think it's pretty obvious that you'd be able to figure out what's going on.
I mean, it was pretty widely known that President Biden instructed the Attorney General to sue President Trump, and that he hired Jack Smith, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, that was on the front page of every paper. If you were an attorney at Verizon and you got a subpoena like this, wouldn't you say, maybe I need to check and see who Mr. Smith is subpoenaing here?
Yeah, and especially once I found out it was a representative, it would immediately raise that flag of, like, maybe there's a legal exception here that doesn't apply in other cases.
Do we know if the employee who received this subpoena at Verizon even sought a legal opinion from an attorney at Verizon?
I do not know.
Well, let's just assume for a second that Verizon, sophisticated company that it is not so incompetent that they wouldn't have had a lawyer look at this. Lawyer looks at it and says, Jack Smith. Lawyer looks at it and says, NDO signed by Judge Boasberg. Lawyer looks at the names, as a reasonably competent lawyer would. Says, they're members of Congress. If that was you, what would you do?
Well, I'd make a few phone calls. I'd do legal research to confirm that, complying with this order was obviously lawful, and I might, gently try and push back on the subpoena to try and understand, what was going on.
In fact, you would probably discover the law, being the very competent lawyer that you are, that said no judicial order can bar Verizon from picking up the phone and calling the member of Congress, wouldn't you?
That's right.
You'd probably find that statute.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did find that statute, in order to protect Verizon, as you're their lawyer, wouldn't you have filed a motion to quash?
That's exactly what I do, yeah.
But Verizon didn't do any of that, did they?
Apparently not.
They just sucked all this information up like a Hoover Deluxe.
Yeah.
They didn't even look at, that we know of, to see if these were members of Congress.
Yes, that's right.
What kind of liability does Verizon have here?
That's a good question. I need to read the statute more clearly to see what the actual penalties are. But my guess is there would be some pretty reasonable civil penalties for having done so.
What kind of remedies, if any, are there for the fact that Judge Boasberg said that he had reasonable grounds to believe that these members of Congress would destroy evidence, and that he made that conclusion without holding a hearing?
I mean, I think the only remedy to that is political and impeachment. I don't think there's a unique. You can't sue Judge Boasberg for damages for his judicial decision making. So the only remedy is political.
Would you consider it to be grossly incompetent if Judge Boasberg had not even inquired who these people were, and whether they were members of Congress?
Oh, yes, extremely incompetent.
Okay. That's all I've got, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, today we're breaking down a jaw-dropping exchange from a recent Senate hearing. What's at stake? It's simple. The federal government, possibly on political orders, issued subpoenas to major U.S. phone companies, including Verizon. They demanded the metadata, essentially the phone records, of 20 members of Congress. You heard that right. This isn't just about privacy. This is about the executive branch reaching deep into another co-equal branch of government, invading the privacy of our elected representatives, and potentially chilling dissent. In the hearing clip I'm about to discuss, a senator puts Verizon, one of America's biggest telecoms, under the microscope for how they handled a subpoena from special counsel Jack Smith, and whether anyone at Verizon even bothered to question the constitutionality or legality of this unprecedented request. Let's get straight to it. The senator starts by laying out some facts. Verizon isn't a mom-and-pop operation. With about 90,000 employees and $140 billion in revenue, you'd expect their legal department to be staffed by some of the country's sharpest legal minds. So, the basic question is, how did such a massive corporation fail to even question a blatantly political subpoena for congressional phone records? As a patriot, this makes my blood boil. Our system relies on strong, independent institutions willing to push back against government overreach. What we saw here is a corporation rolling over, either out of fear or complicity. The senator presses, if you were a lawyer at Verizon and got a subpoena like this, especially one with a non-disclosure order signed by a federal judge, wouldn't you at least check who Jack Smith is, who Judge Boasberg is? And most crucially, wouldn't you see that the targets are members of Congress? People who are constitutionally protected and whose communications with their constituents deserve the highest safeguard? According to the witness in the hearing, any reasonably competent lawyer should raise red flags immediately. I completely agree. If I were in the shoes of a corporate attorney and saw members of Congress listed, I'd be calling every legal expert I know, researching the law, and looking for concrete reasons to protect those records, potentially even moving to quash the subpoena outright in court. But what did Verizon do? Nothing. As the senator said, they sucked all this information up like a Hoover Deluxe. They didn't even bother to investigate or, as far as we can tell, consult one of their own lawyers about the legal and constitutional risks. They just handed over the data, no questions asked. And the worst part? There's evidence that the only reason these records were demanded was because Judge Boasberg, without even holding a hearing, decided he believed these members of Congress might destroy evidence. Now, stop and consider that a judge, motivated or pressured by political actors, making a secret determination that justifies spying on another branch of government. That is not how our constitutional system is supposed to work. As the witness says, the direct remedies against a judge for this kind of thing are, unfortunately, pretty much non-existent outside impeachment. You can't sue a judge for damages over a bad judicial decision. All you can do is hold them accountable politically, either by impeachment or public outcry, which doesn't happen nearly enough. But let's talk about Verizon's end. The law is pretty clear. If a judge or prosecutor tries to stop you from alerting a congressman that their records are being seized, as their lawyer, you should be sounding every alarm. There are constitutional boundaries here, reinforced by statute. Basic legal research should have turned that up. Instead, Verizon chose compliance over courage. So what's at stake when huge corporations refuse to stand up to government overreach? Everything. If the government can go after Congress today, what's to stop them from coming after you and me tomorrow? Don't think it can't happen. Don't think it's only the bad guys who get caught in these dragnets. History proves otherwise. Ask yourself, what kind of country do we want to live in? One where unelected bureaucrats and appointed judges, possibly acting on politically motivated accusations, can trample the Constitution with zero resistance from the private sector? Or do we demand a system where every American, from the smallest citizen to the most powerful senator, has their constitutional rights defended, no matter how powerful the government entity threatening them? To everyone watching, this is why we push for accountability, transparency, and a culture of resistance to government overreach at every level of society. This is why we must demand that our tech and telecom companies serve the American people, not just comply blindly with every executive demand. Every American, no matter their political affiliation, should be outraged by this abuse. Today, it's 20 members of Congress. Tomorrow, it could be journalists, activists, or even you, just for expressing unpopular opinions. If you agree, do your part. Share this video. Support candidates who believe in the Constitution and who will pressure big corporations to stand up for your rights. Hold your representatives accountable. Never lose your voice. That's what the Founding Fathers intended, and it's what we're fighting for at Freedom Forge. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We're building a movement, one patriot at a time. Stay informed, stay watchful, and never stop fighting for freedom. Thanks for watching, and God bless America.